Hello, everyone, and welcome to a conversation at Marawila in Sri Lanka, where a number of us who are think tanks or policy research institutes, part of the think tank initiative, have come together and have just concluded a very interesting couple of days in conversations about the life of a think tank and all the challenges and all the potential that it has. I have great pleasure to have with me here Mr. Ajaya Dixit, who is the director of the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, ISET Nepal, as it's more commonly referred to, with me. Welcome, Ajay. Great pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Shekhar, for this initiative.
Well, it's been interesting 2-3 days of very intense conversations. And one of the hallmarks of that, from what I have seen, I wasn't there at the first such workshop in Nimrana, but certainly from the one in Mysore and now here in Marawila, I have a sense that there's been a progression. I don't know if that accords with your sense of how we have
absolutely. I mean, if I go back 2.5 years in Nimrana, well, it was for the first time where the 16 think tanks we got together, and we have heard of organizations. The names were familiar. Of course, the personalities, the names were familiar. We met a couple of times, and with some of the organizations, perhaps also been involved in some joint activities. But as a think tank cohort, it was first time we got together, and clearly, when I look back, there was a kind of a little bit uneasiness, if you will, a little bit of apprehension, trying to figure out who is what and why am I here, perhaps positioning a little bit, to be very, very frank and candid, and then a little bit wary of each other. That was the kind of sort of a very generic, more sort of a broad environment in Nimrana. Of course, the first day, second day we got to talk, and then a little more establish that connection.
Right.
Mysore was much more engaging in that sense. It brought a little bit of our more human aspect of us together, a little bit of our work. And South Africa was the other step, but I think South Africa was too big.
Yes.
I think we had Africans and we had Latin Americans and we had South Asian. I think the event was useful indeed, but then I think it was a little big to sort of connect. But now I think we've spent time, we've been aware of each other's work. I think this 5 days in Marawila, I've really sensed a difference. I think we have connected with each other much more differently. We're much more closer. We appreciate each other as individuals. Mm-hmm. I think we recognize the value of where one comes from, the kind of ideas this person brings to the platform, why he's saying so. So I think in that sense, I think it's been excellent, and I really enjoyed. I've been a kind of a partnership guy, I work in a couple of networks, and all the time I've been saying, look, emails are fine, webinars are fine, Skype is good, but there is nothing to human connection. There is nothing to, connecting and then understanding the individual, the person, the human, you see. I think that's been great experience in Marawila, and I think we have now a foundation where we can build on that and do something productive, exciting, and effective, useful, as a cohort.
Sure.
As we move forward.
I'm just looking at the agenda and the very interesting session that you led on connecting research and policy making in very difficult and complex circumstances. Certainly, Nepal heads the list in terms of difficult and complex circumstances. How has ISET-N carved out a role for itself? Partly, I ask this question also because you are distinctive from many of the others. Your origins are distinctive. Your technical and technological bent on water and other issues is quite specialized, and you're now coming into more policy analysis, policy advice, policy outreach. In Nepal's very complex political, social and economic situation, how has ISET navigated the waters?
Yeah, thank you, Shekhar, for this question. We work at the intersection of social and natural science. I mean, I started as a natural scientist. I was a trained hydraulic engineer, trained water resource professional, worked in that area for a long time. And as I was saying, I thought putting in dams and putting in pipes and thinking about megawatts and all that would be what development and change is all about. But then as you grow and as you begin to look at the reality, the society is already out there. The society does things. It's not a clean slate. And as engineers, we're never trained to look at society. That was the, I guess, the limitation of the paradigm, within which we kind of evolved. We're kind of trained to design, certain stuff and put it in the field and then expect that the society would kind of, behave in the way we want it to. But then as we grew, I realized that no, the technology, the science that we understand or been taught needs to be linked with, what people are already doing.
Sure.
And clearly, society's study is very different discipline. The language is discipline, the episteme of the knowledge is different. So somehow we need to recognize these linkages. And what we tried over the years was to look at society from the perspective or lens of water. So that gave us a little bit of a little bit of a lateral entry into this whole question of knowledge and policy process. So as an organization, that was the kind of a background, not really engaged directly in policy process. We did engage with the government, but perhaps as a more critical, sort of a group outside, producing constructive yet critical knowledge. So that has been our strength, and we produced good stuff. We are good researchers, and that's what we wrote in our proposal. We are good researchers, but we are good managers. So the challenge for us to balance between the quality research that we do, and then an institutional structure that would facilitate this process. So that was how think tank came, and as think tank was being planned, Nepal is going through this horrendous historical sort of socio-political transition, where the focus of the state and the sort of the mainstream was not really on the kind of knowledge we produce or the kind of issues we deal with, though they are very central to sustained democracy, service delivery, and equity and justice, and so on and so forth. The question of governance, and then of course you slap in climate change, as a new layer adding to this complexity.
Of huge significance to Nepal.
Absolutely. I would say even not just to Nepal, to South Asia.
Well, Nepal is upstream of India.
Of course. Of course.
So whatever happens in Nepal will certainly have a consequence all the way down to Bangladesh.
Exactly. So clearly, it adds a very complex layer, and that requires a very different lens of looking at this whole business of doing things. Our work is mostly on adaptation. So what we try to do within this political landscape that's very uncertain and uncertain, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And then of course a very different focus is to kind of focus on, let's focus on the kind of work that we are doing, our comparative advantage, and then look at this question of adaptation, look at this question of responding to climate change. And if we can add value to the methods and techniques and processes that we have as we conceive normal development, and if we can expand that range of possibilities, so when the political system stabilizes, when you have opportunities, we would have this menu of evidence, this menu of ideas which you can go and engage, and perhaps that would give us an opportunity to think about the way we say look at development, or perhaps look at economics, or look at other disciplines in a slightly different way, and perhaps be a little more creative, if we will, sort of thinking about a little bit uncomfortable knowledge, if we will. The complexity requires you to think outside the box. The traditional knowledge is not going to give you all the solutions. You need to begin to think about, hey, what is it that I know? Why don't I get out of my comfort zone? Why don't I look at it from a different perspective? And perhaps this is where we as think tank cohort need to experiment a little bit. Let's think outside the box. Let's try get out of our comfort zone. and try and look at it from a slightly different perspective. Take the risk, you know.
Can I provoke you into answering the question then of did TTI take you out of your comfort zone or put you more in your comfort zone?
I would say TTI put us out of our comfort zone. It forced us to think, hey guys, wait a minute. If you are thinking about making a difference, if you are thinking about engaging in policy, you'll have to think about range of ways you do it. You know, producing knowledge, research is fine. You know, we've been doing that for the last 20 years. But then, if you want to, you know, make a dent, you have to do differently. You have to invest more in engagement. You have to recognize that people may have very different perspective from you do, and then you may have your own bias and prejudices as a researcher, but others do have. So you need to recognize those differences, and then you need to work around those differences. And clearly, once you begin this process of kind of, you know, dialogue and conversation, you find out areas where you have similarities, where you agree, and where you can begin to make a difference. You know, a difference is not something that transformational perhaps, but even incremental difference. You know, make a difference here and make a difference there, and that kind of adds to a much bigger.
But it's interesting you say it took you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Instinctively or a knee-jerk reaction to receiving core funding might be, well, you know, now you can sit back and take it easy for a couple of years because you've got this chunk of funding, depending on the size of the funding relative to your overall budget. But the instinctive or knee-jerk reaction might have been, you know, now we can relax a little bit. That's obviously not been the case with ISET Nepal.
Well, let me be very frank and candid. You know, as I was saying in the first session, we never thought about institutions. You know, I mean, we were more a product of an environmental movement. So we had the passion and we had the idealism and the, you know, sort of romanticism, if you will. And it helps, you know, it does help because you are passionate about what you do. I love the work I do. It's hard, it's time taking, but I enjoy it, you know, I mean, I love it. But then there is also a limit as to what you can do individually. And I was also I'm not getting younger, you know, so.
None of us are.
None of us are. So when this grant came and I began to ask some fundamental questions about institutions, I kind of say, hey, how much time do I give? I suddenly realized I give about 75% of my time, both in management and in research. And my researchers gave, you know, perhaps 15% time. And I said, can I continue to do this for 5 years? Can I continue to invest 75% of my time? What happens to the institution? What happens to me physically? So suddenly I realized, hey, wait a minute, this will not work. I have to, as an institution, we have to change. We have to bring that systemic element in place. The institution has to be in the forefront, and then you have to, you know, inculcate that passion, that you know, sense of quality, sense of belonging, and the sense of participation in that institution, among everybody you are together, and then to inculcate that sense of ownership is not easy, you know? But then it took us a long time and hard effort to begin to recognize or realize those realities. And then of course then it forced us to think about, what about policies? Yes, everybody is asking about policies. Even earlier when we were doing research on local water management and floods and, you know, energy and others, people would ask me, so what's your research contributes to policy and how? You know, we are forced to ask those, sort of answer those questions, and we had no answers. And those days we did kind of, I mean, we did interact with the state. We did interact with the state in a sort of in a very indirect way. You know, we thought, all right, informing the public dialogue, inform the knowledge stream, inform the public space, and allow the political process to kind of, you know, pick up on the knowledge we produce and so on and so forth. We still do that.
Yes.
But that's, I think, is just not enough. You know, you have to consciously
reach out
to policymakers within the state structure, central government, the local level governments, teachers, CBOs, NGOs. So in a sort of a bit organized way, we have begun that process. You know, we've been now engaging much more with government departments. We've organized a national level conference. we sat down with them and we sort of helped them prepare their action plan. This is something we would not do, 2.5
So if
years.
TTI had not come to you, you think all of this might not have quite happened the way it has happened now?
We would have continued on our research stream. I think we would still have found some funder. And there are enough problems around the world, and we do good work. So we would continue to have produced, knowledge on the kind of things we do, but perhaps in the same way, in the same way that we've been doing 5 years earlier, not thinking differently, not thinking in an organized sense. So in that way, I think TTI really was key for us to begin that transformation, begin to think institutionally, begin to think about expanding our board of governors.
You've expanded your.
We have expanded our board of governors. It's much more diverse. We brought in, members of the planning commission. We brought in people who are advisors to government. We brought in media persons. We brought in.